He wasn't supposed to make it this far. The wind carried a bitter chill across the ridge of Pine Hollow, tugging at the hem of Captain Malik Turner's jacket as he moved slowly along the rocky path, each step sending a small cloud of dust into the cold morning air. The distant mountains shimmered through a thin veil of fog, their jagged outlines softened by the rising sun, casting a pale gold glow over the slopes. Malik's chest rose and fell in shallow, measured breaths, the echo of his heartbeat sounding louder in his own ears than anything else around him. Behind him, hidden in the haze, Blizzard padded silently, paws sinking slightly into the gravel and scattered leaves, ears pricked forward, amber eyes sharp and unwavering. Blizzard had been Malik's companion through countless exercises, through the hum of helicopters and the cadence of marching boots. Yet today, the dog's loyalty carried a weight beyond the ordinary. Each measured step forward seemed guided by instinct and memory, the scent of Malik's uniform lingering faintly in the breeze like a breadcrumb trail that pulled Blizzard closer with every mile. The trail wound through twisted pines and low shrubs, the air thick with the scent of pine resin and damp earth, carrying a hint of smoke from distant campfires. The dog's coat, a brilliant white tipped with faint streaks of gray around the muzzle, shimmered in the slanting sunlight, muscles taut beneath the fur as if the body itself remembered every mission and every time Malik had relied upon him. Blizzard paused for a moment at a curve in the path, nose quivering as he caught the faintest whiff of his marine, a mix of sweat, metal, and the faint tang of old leather, a signal no human could replicate. Malik, unaware that his four-legged shadow had already been tracking him for miles, sank to a knee against the rough stone, his hand pressing against the cold surface to steady himself, eyes scanning the landscape for a path that seemed endless. The jagged rocks glinted in the sunlight, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the path, and a distant river murmured softly below, water striking stones with a gentle, rhythmic hiss that seemed to whisper of life and persistence. Blizzard, sensing the pause, emitted a soft whine, a gentle reminder that he was there, pressing forward despite the miles and the thinness of the air, every step a testament to the unspoken bond that had been forged between them long before this morning, long before the fatigue and strain had threatened to overwhelm Malik. As the Marine leaned against a weathered oak, trying to summon the energy to rise, Blizzard crested the next ridge, ears flicking at the faint sound of movement, eyes locking onto the figure hunched on the trail below. The world seemed to slow, each rustle of leaves, each distant bird call, each whisper of the wind heightened, as if time itself had stretched to honor the reunion that was about to unfold. Malik's hand shifted to brush damp hair from his forehead, eyes narrowing against the glare of the sun, and for a heartbeat he felt an inexplicable sense of being watched, a warmth and familiarity that drew a faint, grateful smile across his face. Blizzard dropped into a low crouch, tail sweeping softly along the gravel as he approached, the tag on his collar catching a glint of light and sending a tiny reflection across the stones, a silent beacon of identity, a promise written not in words but in trust and remembrance. The air between them seemed to vibrate with quiet anticipation, the mountains around echoing the unspoken message carried on 4 paws across 12 miles. That some bonds, once formed, endure beyond exhaustion, beyond distance, beyond the limits of any human measure. Each step Blizzard took seemed measured, deliberate, a choreography of devotion that spoke louder than any voice could, and Malik, sensing the shadow approach, allowed himself to lift his gaze, amber eyes meeting amber eyes, recognizing, remembering, and feeling the surge of reassurance that only such a loyal companion could provide. Blizzard reached him without a bark, without the burst of excitement that once filled the training yard at Camp Pendleton, because something in the dog understood this was not a moment for noise. It was a moment for stillness. Captain Malik Turner lowered one hand, his fingers trembling from cold and fatigue, and Blizzard pressed his forehead into the palm as if placing a living prayer there. The contact steadied him. For a few seconds, Malik did not speak. He only breathed. The fog moved slowly between the pines, turning the world soft at the edges, and the morning light spread across the ridge in thin golden bands that touched the white fur along Blizzard's back. Malik swallowed hard, his voice low and rough when it finally came. "How did you find me, boy?" Blizzard answered by leaning closer, his shoulder resting against Malik's knee, his collar tag giving a faint metallic click against the zipper of Malik's jacket. That sound opened a door in Malik's memory. Not all at once. Just enough. A training field under a California sun. The smell of dust and ocean wind. A younger Blizzard running through orange cones with that same steady focus, ignoring whistles, ignoring distractions, ignoring everything except Malik's voice. Back then, Malik had been newly promoted, proud but quiet. A man who had learned early that leadership was less about being loud and more about being steady when others were afraid. He was 36 now, broad-shouldered, disciplined, with dark brown skin warmed by years beneath foreign suns and American skies, his close-cut hair dusted with a few early strands of silver near the temples. Most people noticed his posture first, the calm way he carried himself even when the day turned uncertain. Blizzard noticed other things. The small change in Malik's breathing when old memories visited. The way his hand drifted toward the dog tag beneath his shirt when silence became too heavy. The way he sometimes stood outside the barracks long after lights out, watching the stars as if waiting for an answer only heaven could give. Blizzard had come into his life after a difficult season. A white German Shepherd K9 transferred from a search and rescue unit in northern Washington, beautiful, alert, and strangely quiet for a dog his size. Some handlers thought he was too independent. Some said he was too watchful, too slow to trust, too different from the louder dogs who barked at every command. Malik had seen something else. He saw a soul that listened before it moved. He saw a creature who did not need to be forced into loyalty, because loyalty was already written into the way he stood beside people. Their bond did not happen in one grand moment. It grew in small acts. A shared canteen lid filled with water on a hot afternoon. A quiet command spoken without urgency. Blizzard lying across the doorway of Malik's office during storms, never sleeping deeply, always watching. Malik giving him the last bite of turkey from a paper plate after Thanksgiving dinner in the mess hall, pretending no one saw. Then came the day Malik fastened a new collar around Blizzard's neck, a dark leather band with a polished tag that seemed too bright for such a humble dog. He had knelt in front of him and rubbed the fur beneath his chin. "This is not decoration," Malik had said softly. "This is a promise." Blizzard had tilted his head, ears sharp, eyes bright. Malik had smiled then, a rare full smile that made the younger Marines nearby look twice. On the back of that tag, he had asked the engraver to place a message that no one else understood at the time. Not a phone number, not a rank, not a command. Something simpler. Something born from the night Malik had once been lost in his own grief and found Blizzard waiting outside his door, white fur glowing in moonlight like a small answer from God. Now, on the ridge, that same tag clicked again as Blizzard shifted beside him, and Malik glanced down, catching only the flash of metal, not yet reading the words. The wind changed. It came colder from the north, carrying the scent of rain and wet stone. Malik knew the trail ahead would not be easy. The safe road back to the temporary field station lay somewhere beyond the lower timberline, more than a mile away by his guess, maybe two if the fog confused the distance. His radio had lost signal in the hollow. His canteen was nearly empty, and the ache in his body had turned each movement into a negotiation. Blizzard stepped in front of him, then looked back. Not urging, not demanding, just waiting. Malik let out a breath that almost became a laugh, tired and grateful. "You are really going to make me get up, are you?" The dog's tail moved once, slow and certain. Malik placed one hand on the tree trunk and pushed himself upright, careful, unsteady, but no longer alone. Blizzard moved at his side immediately, close enough for Malik to rest 2 fingers in the thick fur at his shoulder. Together, they started down the ridge, one step at a time, while the fog closed behind them like a curtain, and somewhere beneath the quiet weight of the morning, the little tag carried its hidden message forward, waiting for the moment it would change everything. The slope leveled out slightly as they moved into a clearing where the fog thinned and sunlight began to touch the edges of frost-covered grass. Captain Malik Turner paused, catching a shallow breath, and Blizzard nuzzled his side, sensing the brief lapse in energy and offering silent encouragement. The distant sound of a creek winding through the hollow reached them, a steady, rhythmic murmur that seemed to guide each step as Malik adjusted the strap of his backpack, feeling the weight shift just enough to allow more balance. The air carried the scent of wet pine needles and damp stone, a mixture that reminded Malik of late autumn mornings on the training grounds before dawn, when the world held a quiet promise that only those who were awake could feel. Blizzard walked close, ears rotating to catch subtle noises, tail low but moving with a soft rhythm, every step deliberate and patient, allowing Malik to follow without losing momentum. The ridge ahead appeared longer than it had from a distance, the path winding and uneven, strewn with small rocks and the occasional fallen branch. But Malik noticed how Blizzard anticipated each obstacle, pausing slightly before a tricky patch and then leading with gentle confidence. Memories surfaced unbidden. The first time Blizzard had followed him on a night exercise in the mountains, the snow soft beneath paws, the cold biting at exposed skin, and how the dog had refused to leave his side until every shadow was accounted for. Malik felt a faint smile curve his lips at the recollection, a flash of warmth amid fatigue. As they approached the base of a small rise, Blizzard stopped, nose raised, sniffing a faint scent that only he could detect. Malik bent forward slightly, curiosity piqued, and readjusted his footing to see better. The tag on Blizzard's collar caught the sunlight, casting a tiny glint across the stones. Malik's fingers twitched toward it instinctively, the engravings faint but clear enough to hint at the words they held. The morning air was still, save for the faint rustle of leaves and the distant trill of a bird, as if nature itself paused to witness the moment. Malik's eyes softened as he realized the dog's persistence was not merely instinct but an unspoken message, a reassurance carried through 12 miles of rough terrain, fog, and solitude. Blizzard pressed against his leg, leaning slightly as if to say, "Keep moving, do not falter," and Malik, heart stirring with gratitude, nodded almost imperceptibly. The path curved once more, revealing a shallow stream with stones that glimmered in the sunlight, ice forming in patches along the edges. Malik tested each step carefully, using a fallen log for balance, and Blizzard mirrored his caution while remaining ready to assist if needed, body tense but controlled, muscles flexing with every movement. The distance between them and the temporary field station lessened slowly, each step a shared effort, a silent collaboration born of years of mutual trust and reliance. Malik remembered again the first time Blizzard had been assigned to him, a young, eager K9 with white fur mottled by faint cream patches, and how the dog had learned to read him as quickly as he had learned to read the dog, a bond forming in the quiet gestures, the soft exhalations, the moments of patience and presence. Now, 12 miles later, that bond carried them forward through the mist and cold, through fatigue and uncertainty, a steady rhythm that anchored Malik's mind even as his body protested. Blizzard's eyes held a quiet intensity, amber and unwavering, reflecting the sunlight in a way that seemed almost deliberate, as if to say, the message was here, the journey was meaningful, and the promise embedded on the tag was yet to be fully realized. Malik adjusted his pack one last time, shoulders steadying, and took a measured breath. He felt the crisp morning air fill his lungs and sensed the faint but undeniable presence of home just beyond the next rise. And with Blizzard at his side, the unspoken understanding between them carried a weight far greater than distance, terrain, or fatigue, an enduring loyalty that had led them both through the fog and toward a morning that would reveal everything. The clearing opened up to reveal the edge of a small ridge overlooking a valley where the morning sun painted the landscape in soft amber hues. Captain Malik Turner paused to steady himself against a rock, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face as Blizzard rested a paw gently on his calf, a reminder that he was not alone. The faint rustle of leaves and the distant call of a hawk mingled with the soft murmur of the wind, creating a rhythm that seemed to echo the quiet beat of their shared determination. Malik's eyes scanned the valley below, noting the winding trail that would lead them back to the temporary station, and he allowed himself a small smile, a rare light in a morning filled with exertion and the weight of fatigue. Blizzard stepped forward, careful and deliberate, ears alert, nose lowered to catch every faint scent carried by the breeze. Each step the dog took was precise, placing claws gently on the frosted grass to maintain balance, while signaling Malik where to place his own feet. Malik followed, adjusting his stride to match Blizzard's guidance, feeling a sense of trust that was deeper than any spoken command could convey. The frost began to melt slightly in the sun's rays, dripping from needles of the pines and creating tiny sparkling streams along the ridge, adding a quiet music to the atmosphere that made Malik's chest feel lighter despite the miles traveled. Blizzard's amber eyes flicked occasionally to Malik, as if confirming that he was still following, still present, and Malik felt the warmth of connection radiate through him, a reminder of the countless mornings spent training together, the exercises completed side by side, the moments when trust had been built quietly, step by step. The trail wound down into a gentle incline, small stones shifting underfoot, and Malik shifted the weight of his pack, feeling Blizzard brush against him with each careful step, guiding, steadying, and ensuring that the distance they had covered together was not in vain. Sunlight glimmered along the dog's white coat, highlighting the faint cream patches around his muzzle and the lean muscles beneath his fur, and Malik could not help but notice the resilience in every movement, the determination that had carried Blizzard across 12 miles of rough terrain and fog-laden paths. The scent of damp earth and pine resin grew stronger as they descended, mingling with the faint metallic hint of morning dew on scattered rocks, grounding Malik in the moment and giving him a renewed sense of purpose. Blizzard paused at a bend where a fallen tree partially blocked the path, assessing the situation, and Malik mirrored the dog's hesitation, carefully stepping over the log with Blizzard guiding the way, anticipating each shift and movement. A distant glimmer of the field station appeared between the trees, a promise of safety, a beacon that had driven them forward through hours of exertion. Blizzard's tail moved slightly, a soft swish against the frost, and Malik felt the subtle encouragement, the silent urging to continue, to finish what they had started. With each step, the bond between them deepened, unspoken yet unmistakable, a connection that transcended words and time, a shared understanding born from loyalty, trust, and countless quiet moments of guidance and companionship. Malik allowed his eyes to soften, taking in the panorama around him, the valley stretching wide with hints of distant hills and winding streams, and he realized that this journey, while physically taxing, had also renewed a sense of clarity and calm in his mind, a reflection of the quiet resilience embodied in Blizzard's measured steps. The trail leveled as they approached the outer edge of the station, the sound of distant activity carrying faintly through the crisp air, and Malik felt a gentle exhale of relief, knowing that the dog's steadfast determination had led them here, bridging the gap between exhaustion and accomplishment, between solitude and reunion, between challenge and the quiet satisfaction of mutual perseverance. Blizzard nudged Malik's leg, a soft, deliberate press that demanded acknowledgement, and Malik bent slightly to place his hand on the dog's head, feeling the warmth, the strength, and the reassurance that this was more than a journey. It was a testament to unwavering loyalty and the unspoken promise of being found when it mattered most. As the edge of the station drew near, with buildings casting long morning shadows across the clearing, Malik took a deep, steadying breath, feeling the sun warming his back and Blizzard at his side, ready to continue together, a partnership proven and strengthened by miles of silent determination, shared endurance, and the quiet but profound message carried forward with every careful step across the ridge. The faint hum of activity from the field station grew clearer as Captain Malik Turner and Blizzard approached the perimeter, the scent of warm pinewood and damp earth blending with the subtle metallic tang of morning dew. Malik adjusted his pack and took careful steps over the remaining uneven terrain, feeling the support of Blizzard close at his side, the dog's movements synchronized with his own in a silent dialogue that spoke of trust and unwavering commitment. The valley below opened slightly, revealing the distant outline of the temporary station's wooden structures, the roofs glinting faintly in the sun, smoke curling upward from chimneys where the early morning breakfast had begun to stir the few station personnel. Blizzard paused momentarily, nose raised to catch a scent on the wind, ears flicking toward the faintest noises, and Malik followed his gaze, sensing the subtle but urgent message conveyed without a single sound. He remembered how Blizzard had always been more than a dog in the barracks, how the white canine had a remarkable sense of timing, a way of showing presence exactly when needed, often before anyone else could perceive it. Malik's mind wandered briefly to nights in the mountains training under dim floodlights, the ground frozen underfoot, and Blizzard lying alert on the edge of the field, ears twitching at every rustle, tail occasionally swishing, always aware, always protective. The sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the slope, highlighting small rivulets of water that ran along the path, glistening like tiny threads of silver, and Malik's boots splashed softly in the puddles, the sound rhythmic, almost meditative. Blizzard pressed closer, shoulder brushing against Malik's side, and Malik could feel the warmth of the dog's body, the steady breathing, the subtle shift of weight as Blizzard adjusted to guide him along smoother footing. Every step forward reminded Malik of the lessons learned in quiet moments, of the patience cultivated during countless drills, and the unspoken understanding that loyalty was measured not in distance, but in presence, in steadfastness, in the willingness to remain through the unseen challenges of a day that tested the body and the spirit alike. The trail narrowed briefly where fallen branches had blocked parts of the path, and Blizzard navigated them effortlessly, pausing only to look back and ensure Malik was still following. Malik mirrored the careful steps, lifting his gaze now and then to the horizon, noting the subtle changes in light, the soft haze that marked the air above the valley floor, and the distant birds gliding in arcs that seemed to mark the passage of time, almost reminding him to keep moving, to trust in the rhythm of the journey they shared. As the first sounds of life from the station reached them, a gentle clatter from a storage shed, the faint murmur of voices, Malik felt a swell of relief, the knowledge that the end of this stretch was near, yet tempered by the awareness that the journey itself had been transformative. Blizzard stepped forward, a low, soft whine breaking the silence just enough to draw Malik's attention, a subtle signal that the dog was aware of the presence of others, not in alarm, but in anticipation of reunion and guidance. Malik reached down, brushing a hand over Blizzard's white fur, feeling the warmth and the familiar texture, a tangible reassurance that their bond was intact, unbroken by miles or the fog of morning exertion. The slope leveled further, the grass softening underfoot, dew dripping from low branches, and the scent of cooked breakfast mingling with pine and soil, bringing an almost home-like comfort to the atmosphere. Each careful step carried them closer, Blizzard alert yet calm, Malik breathing steadily, heart quieting in rhythm with the dog's measured steps. The sunlight caught the edges of Blizzard's coat, illuminating the faint cream patches around the muzzle, glinting off the tag that carried its hidden message, and Malik's fingers itched to reach down, to finally read the words that had guided him across these miles. The air seemed to hum with quiet anticipation, the subtle rustle of wind and movement of wildlife forming a backdrop to the climax of this morning journey, and Malik allowed a soft exhale, savoring the sensation of being guided, accompanied, understood without words. Blizzard's eyes, amber and bright, flicked toward Malik, as if acknowledging the shared passage, the persistence, the endurance, and the quiet but profound satisfaction of completing the journey together. Step by step, the gap to the station closed, the wooden structures coming into sharper focus, and Malik felt the quiet assurance that some bonds, once forged, could not be broken, traveling through time, terrain, and trials, carrying the unspoken message of fidelity, courage, and enduring companionship. The wooden fence of the field station came into full view as Captain Malik Turner and Blizzard reached the final stretch, the morning sun now spilling warm light across the clearing and illuminating the frost still clinging to the tops of the grass. Malik paused for a moment to straighten his jacket, feeling the weight of the journey, both physical and emotional, settling in his shoulders. Blizzard pressed close, his paws crunching softly over the gravel, amber eyes glinting with focus and quiet pride. The scent of pine mingled with the faint aroma of cooked breakfast wafting from the mess hall, a small comfort after miles of misty trails and uneven paths. Malik took a measured breath, letting the rhythm of Blizzard's steps guide him, each movement deliberate, each glance exchanged conveying reassurance and trust without words. The slope leveled further, revealing the first of the field stations. Vehicles parked neatly in the lot, their painted surfaces catching the sunlight in fleeting glimmers. A few Marines could be seen moving about, preparing equipment, their movements deliberate but unaware of the reunion unfolding a few hundred yards away. Blizzard shifted slightly, shoulder brushing against Malik's leg, urging forward with a gentle insistence, a reminder that the final steps required focus and care despite the sense of relief now in the air. Malik's heart stirred with a quiet mix of gratitude and wonder as he felt the bond between them, strengthened by the journey, by the distance, and by the silent understanding that had carried them together through fog, frost, and exhaustion. He recalled again the first time Blizzard had responded to his call on a training field, the dog leaping through obstacles with purpose, ears pricked, eyes bright, and how over time that precision and attention had grown into a deeper awareness, an almost intuitive reading of Malik's moods, movements, and needs. Now, as they approached the perimeter gate, the crisp morning air was filled with the soft hum of activity, the distant murmur of voices, the metallic click of tools being handled, the occasional clink of chains on storage racks, all blending into a background rhythm that marked the station as alive and welcoming. Blizzard lowered his head slightly, sniffing the air, tail sweeping once against the gravel in a slow, measured motion, and Malik followed suit, feeling the familiar comfort of the dog's presence guiding each step. The tag on Blizzard's collar caught a final ray of sunlight, glinting in a way that drew Malik's attention without the need for words, hinting at the message carried silently across miles of terrain, a reassurance that loyalty and determination had brought them to this point. As they reached the last gentle incline before the gate, Malik allowed himself a brief moment to take in the scenery. The faint haze of morning over the valley, the soft golden light filtering through the pines, the quiet movement of a hawk high above in arcs that seemed to mark the passage of time. Blizzard adjusted his position, shoulder pressed close to Malik's leg, ears flicking attentively toward the distant sound of footsteps on the wooden decking beyond the gate, signaling the final leg of their approach. Malik felt a warmth in his chest, a deep recognition of the persistence and focus that had carried the dog across every mile, each step a testament to an unspoken promise of presence and care. The breeze shifted slightly, carrying the scent of dew-soaked earth and wood smoke, mingling with the aroma of the small field station and grounding Malik in the reality of their arrival. Every rustle of leaves, every subtle shift in Blizzard's stance, every glint of sunlight across the dog's fur reinforced the quiet message of loyalty, endurance, and unwavering companionship. Step by step, they moved closer to the gate, Blizzard guiding with gentle precision, Malik steadying himself against the rhythm of the dog's presence, and together they traversed the final stretch, the field station now fully in view, the soft sounds of morning life wrapping around them as a cloak of safety, welcome, and the unspoken recognition that some bonds, once forged, endure far beyond any distance, any challenge, and any passage of time. The first Marine to notice them was Lance Corporal Owen Brooks, a young radio operator carrying a coil of cable across the yard with a paper cup of coffee balanced carefully in one hand. He stopped so suddenly the cable slipped from his shoulder and landed in the gravel with a soft thud. For a second, he only stared. Captain Malik Turner stood at the edge of the gate with frost on his boots, dust along the hem of his jacket, and blizzard pressed against his leg like a pale shadow that had refused to fade. The station grew quiet in that strange way places do when something important arrives before anyone has words for it. A wrench stopped tapping against metal. A door remained half open. Someone near the mess hall lowered a tray and forgot to move. Malik tried to straighten his posture because habit lived deep in his bones, but his body answered with a small tremor. Blizzard felt it before anyone else did. The white K9 stepped closer, firm and steady, offering his shoulder as if he had been born for that single purpose. Malik lowered one hand onto the thick fur and nodded toward the gate. Brooks found his voice first. "Captain Turner." His words came out thin with disbelief. Then he turned toward the barracks and called louder. "Captain Turner is here." Within moments, footsteps crossed the wooden decking. Sergeant Henry Mason came out from the operations cabin, his gray sweatshirt pulled over his uniform shirt, his face still marked with the worry of a man who had spent the morning checking maps and radio channels. Behind him came Petty Officer Lauren Hayes, the medical technician assigned to the training detail, carrying a small kit with practiced calm, though her eyes widened when she saw Malik. No one rushed him. They knew better. Marines knew the pride of walking in under your own power. So they made space. That was all. Space, silence, and a kind of respect that did not need applause. Malik took 2 more steps through the gate, then stopped beside the flagpole where the American flag moved softly in the breeze, its fabric catching the morning light. He looked down at Blizzard, and for the first time since the ridge, the dog allowed himself a sound, not a bark, not a cry, but a low rolling breath that carried relief through his whole body. Lauren knelt beside Malik and checked him with gentle efficiency, asking simple questions in a calm voice. Malik answered slowly, his gaze drifting now and then to Blizzard, as if making sure the dog had not vanished back into the fog like some mercy borrowed from heaven. Mason crouched near the dog and shook his head with a breath that sounded almost like prayer. He came from the North Trail, Mason said softly. That is nearly 12 miles from where the last training marker went quiet. Brooks looked at Blizzard with open wonder. There is no way he tracked that far in this fog. Nobody answered, because everyone there had served long enough to know that some things were not impossible simply because no one could explain them. Blizzard stood still while Lauren examined Malik, but his eyes never left his Marine. When she asked Malik to sit on the bench near the gate, Blizzard moved first, positioning himself beside it before Malik. Lower down, as if arranging the world into something safer. The morning had warmed slightly, and drops of melted frost began falling from the roof of the storage shed, each one striking the ground with a soft ticking sound. Malik closed his eyes for a moment. Behind his eyelids came the ridge, the fog, the long path down, and the white shape moving ahead of him, never too far, never too close, always exactly where hope needed to be. Then he felt something cool against his wrist. Blizzard had lifted his head. The collar tag rested against Malik's hand, bright with sunlight, swinging gently from the dark leather band. For the first time that morning, Malik turned it over. The metal was scratched from the journey, dust gathered along the edges, but the engraving on the back was still clear. His thumb moved across the words once, then stopped. The yard seemed to disappear around him. The voices faded. The flag snapped softly overhead. Malik stared at the message, and whatever strength he had been using to hold himself together loosened in his face. Mason saw the change and leaned closer, careful not to intrude. Malik did not speak at first. He only pressed the tag between his thumb and forefinger as if it weighed more than metal, as if the whole morning, the whole 12 miles, the whole quiet miracle had been folded into that tiny silver oval. Blizzard rested his chin on Malik's knee and waited, patient as dawn. At last, Malik read the words aloud, his voice low enough that the Marines had to grow still to hear him. Find the one who saved me. Return him to grace. No one moved. Brooks lowered his eyes. Lauren's hand paused above the medical kit. Mason breathed out slowly, and the sound carried something tender and broken. Malik looked down at Blizzard, finally understanding that the message had not been written for a lost dog. It had been written for a lost man. Malik read the words again, but this time he did not speak them aloud. Find the one who saved me. Return him to grace. The sentence moved through him slowly, like warm light entering a room that had been locked for years. Around the yard, no one interrupted. The Marines stood in the hush of the morning, with their hands lowered and their faces changed by what they had heard, because some messages do not arrive as orders, and some rescues do not look like rescues until the soul finally understands it has been carried. Malik turned the small silver tag in his fingers, feeling every scratch along its edge, every mark left by brush, stone, frost, and miles of stubborn devotion. He remembered the day he had chosen those words. He had been sitting alone outside the kennel after a memorial service, still wearing his dress blues, his shoes polished, his face calm enough to fool everyone except the dog lying beside him. Blizzard had rested his white head on Malik's boot that evening and refused to move, even when the lights went off across the base and the last voices faded into the distance. Malik had not cried then. He had been too tired for tears, too proud, too trained in silence. But Blizzard had stayed. He had stayed through the dark, through the cold, through the long hour when Malik finally bent forward and whispered that he did not know how to keep leading when part of him felt left behind. The next morning, Malik had taken the collar to a little engraving shop outside Oceanside, a place that smelled of coffee, brass dust, and old wood. The man behind the counter had asked if the message was for the dog. Malik had looked out the window at Blizzard waiting beside the truck, white fur bright in the California sun, and answered softly, "No. It is for whoever finds him when I cannot." Now the meaning came back to him with a force gentle enough to break through every wall he had built. It had never been a message for strangers alone. It had been a prayer folded into metal. A hope that someday, when Malik could not find his own way back to peace, someone, something, would find him. Sergeant Henry Mason sat beside him on the bench, not too close, leaving room for the kind of dignity men protect when they are hurting. "You put that on him?" Mason asked. Malik nodded. His thumb was still resting on the engraving. "Years ago." Mason looked at Blizzard, then at the trail behind them, where fog still clung to the pines like a memory trying to leave. Then he understood his orders better than any of us. Malik let out a breath that trembled at the edges. Blizzard lifted his head, ears soft, eyes steady. Malik placed his palm against the dog's cheek, and the white K9 leaned into it with complete trust. No ceremony, no performance, just the weight of a living soul saying, "I found you." Lauren Hayes quietly wrapped a blanket around Malik's shoulders, and he accepted it without protest. That small surrender mattered. Everyone could feel it. The captain who always stood straight, who always answered that he was fine, who always carried worry like another piece of gear, allowed himself to be cared for in front of his people. The yard began to breathe again. A truck door closed softly. Someone in the mess hall turned off the noisy burner. Brooks wiped at his face with the back of his sleeve and pretended the cold had done it. Malik noticed, but he did not call him on it. Mercy sometimes looks like letting another person keep their pride. Blizzard lowered himself at Malik's feet, still close enough that their bodies touched, his fur damp from the morning, his paws dusted with pale clay from the trail. Malik looked down at him and saw not just a working dog, not just a partner, but a witness. Blizzard had seen him at command briefings and lonely dawns, in discipline and doubt, in the strong moments people praised, and the quiet ones nobody knew existed. Across 12 miles, the dog had followed more than a scent. He had followed the part of Malik that still wanted to be found. The sun climbed higher over Pine Hollow, warming the flag, the fence, the roofs of the station, and the little silver tag resting against Blizzard's chest. Malik bent forward until his forehead touched the dog's. For a long moment, there was no rank, no station, no sound except the wind moving gently through the trees. "You brought me back," Malik whispered. Blizzard closed his eyes, as if those were the only words he had needed. And in that small circle of morning light, surrounded by Marines who understood loyalty but had just watched it become grace, Malik Turner finally let himself believe that being rescued did not make a man weaker. Sometimes it only meant love. Had reached him in time. By noon, the field station had settled into a quieter rhythm, but nothing about that morning felt ordinary anymore. The fog had lifted from Pine Hollow, revealing the clean lines of the valley, the dark green sweep of pines, and the narrow trail that disappeared into the northern ridge where Blizzard had first appeared like a white flame against the gray. Captain Malik Turner sat on the bench near the flagpole with a warm blanket around his shoulders and a paper cup of coffee cooling in his hands, not because he needed the coffee, but because holding it gave him something simple to do while the world slowly returned to shape. Blizzard lay at his boots, one paw resting across the toe of Malik's right shoe, as if making sure the man stayed anchored to earth. Petty Officer Lauren Hayes had cleared him for transport back to the main base clinic, but she did not hurry him. Neither did Sergeant Henry Mason. They both seemed to understand that some arrivals take more time than the distance suggests. Malik watched the younger Marines move carefully around the yard, softer than usual, less eager to fill the silence with jokes. Lance Corporal Owen Brooks had placed a fresh bowl of water beside Blizzard and stood for several seconds watching the dog drink. His expression changed from wonder into something more private, something like gratitude. When Blizzard finished, Brooks crouched and whispered, "Good boy," in the reverent way people speak inside a chapel without realizing it. Malik heard him and smiled faintly. That smile surprised everyone, including Malik. It did not erase the ache in his body or the long road behind him, but it opened something. A door, a window, a place where light could enter without asking permission. Later, When the transport truck backed into the yard, Malik rose slowly. Blizzard stood before he did. Ready, always ready, and Malik placed his hand on the dog's head. Easy, he murmured. We are going together. The word together seemed to settle over the yard with quiet authority. Mason picked up Malik's pack and carried it without making a show of it. Lauren opened the truck door. Brooks held Blizzard's leash, but only until Malik reached for it. The moment the leather touched Malik's palm, Blizzard stepped close, and the little silver tag clicked softly against the buckle of the collar. Malik looked down at it one last time before climbing in. The words were still there, catching the sunlight. Find the one who saved me. Return him to Grace. He no longer wondered who they were meant for. Maybe they had always been meant for both of them. Maybe a man saves a dog once, and the dog spends the rest of his life returning the mercy in pieces, one watchful night, one steady step, one impossible journey at a time. The truck rolled out of Pine Hollow just after the hour, tires crunching over gravel, passing the fence, the storage shed, the mess hall, and the flag moving gently above the station. No one saluted dramatically. No one made speeches. The Marines simply stood in a loose line and watched as Captain Turner and Blizzard left together, and that was enough. Sometimes honor does not need ceremony. Sometimes it looks like a group of tired people standing in the sun, understanding that they have witnessed something they will not know how to explain. Through the window, Malik watched the ridge recede. The road curved through the pines, and for the first time in a long while, he did not feel embarrassed by the help he had received. He felt humbled. He felt seen. Blizzard rested his head on Malik's knee, eyes half closed, body finally giving in to the weight of the 12 miles behind him. Malik ran his fingers through the white fur between the dog's ears, slow and careful, feeling the warmth of life, the proof of loyalty, the answer to a prayer he had never fully spoken. The valley opened wide beyond the glass, sunlight moving over the hills in quiet waves. In the days that followed, people would talk about the distance, the fog, the strange way Blizzard had found the trail when no one else could. They would measure the miles, check the maps, and shake their heads at the odds. But Malik would remember something smaller. The sound of the tag against the collar. The pressure of Blizzard's shoulder against his leg. The moment his own words came back to him and told him that Grace had not forgotten his name. Years later, when younger Marines asked why the white K9 was allowed to sleep outside the captain's office instead of the kennel, Malik would only point to the tag and say, "He is standing orders." And Blizzard, older then, slower around the muzzle, would lift his head as if he understood every word. Because he did. Some promises are not kept by strength. They are kept by love that refuses to leave. And on a quiet road beneath the American sun, a wounded Marine and a tired white dog rode home together, not as hero and rescuer, but as two souls who had found their way back to Grace.